Well, hello again. Pastor Ray Barnett here, welcoming you to another broadcast of God's Answers for Anxiety and Depression. As always, I want to wish all of you watching a good morning, a good evening, or a good afternoon, depending on what time you're watching this broadcast. Before we get started, just a couple of things. Number one, I didn't upload any lessons Monday or Tuesday. Today's Wednesday. And the reason being is it's trivial, but temperatures here in upstate New York at night have dropped pretty low. I had the windows open in my bedroom, and my neck seized up. It was pretty painful for a couple of days. So I just kind of let the broadcast go for Monday and Tuesday because of my temporary condition. No big deal. Secondly, although we have another beautiful day, it's also very, very windy. So I'm hoping that my positioning here looks like I'm in the bushes, but I'm actually down by the river, and it's a beautiful day to see a lot of the scenery. But as you can see from the rustling of the bushes, the wind is blowing pretty hard, and I don't want it to interfere with the broadcast, and I hope that it doesn't. So anyway, here we are, and I have quite a few thoughts. Let me start with this one here. The more I read and the more I research, particularly or in particular with respect to this current situation that we have going on with the virus, the more I'm reading of the projections going back as long ago, which wasn't very long, as long ago as 6 months ago, where they were projecting how many people would be affected in their mental health due to the isolation or feelings of isolation, being shut down, being restricted in their contacts, and you get the picture. I think we should also add in the fear that has permeated so much of the reports and the broadcasting and the dissemination of, for lack of a better term, I'll use information concerning the virus. And it has been my concern for people like yourself and so many others that, number one, for those of you who have had ongoing issues with anxiety, depression, or other things, that this will only exacerbate it, make it worse. Now we have another class of people who ordinarily wouldn't be affected with anxiety and depression that are affected by it now. And in particular, on one of these broadcasts, I just briefly mentioned near the end of one of these lessons, never to entertain the thought of suicide. Now, in my research this morning, I was coming across a prediction that goes back to the spring of 2020 that, it was reported by quite a few news agencies, and I don't know how they came up with this figure, but they were predicting that upwards of 75,000 people would commit suicide related to the virus. Now again, I don't know how to validate that, and I don't know how they could validate those numbers, but I do think overall, regardless of what figure it may be at the moment, how many months are we into this now? It's I mean, quite a few. Regardless of the figure and how people come to the conclusions of such statistical information, I think that it's safe to say that there have been already a number of people who have taken their own life, not merely for fear of the COVID virus, but particularly because of the economy. Now recall that our economy was booming until this situation hit us. And for example, during the Great Depression from 1928 to 1933, the percentage of suicides at the time before the Great Depression, the national average was something around 12%. And it jumped up to 18, almost 20% during the Great Depression, but that was strictly related to the economy. So I just want to mention that we have a complex situation going on in not only America but around the world. And we have a lot of people, and again, like yourself, whose symptoms of anxiety and depression have been made worse by the isolation and those things that accompany it, such as the obvious, loneliness. One of the banes of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, they all fall under a category of mental health issues. And then, of course, the more serious cases of schizophrenia, bipolar depression, and what have you. As we increase in severity of the condition, we also see a statistical rise in the numbers of the statistical numbers of people who do take their own life or whose conditions just simply get worse rises with the economy, lack of jobs. How many, we talk about, or the news talks about a lot about the mortality rate from the virus, but think about the number of people. For instance, in the springtime, there was about 200 million people in some sort of lockdown. Now, let that number sink in when you realize that the population of the United States of America currently, as of today, is over 331,400,000 and some odd thousand and change. Think of 200 million people a few months back being locked in. I mean, that's a catch phrase, but it's a lot of people. It would be 2/3 of the United States of America. And then when you think of the, at one point at least, there was over 50 million people put into unemployment, or put on unemployment. And then when we look at each week how many hundreds of thousands of people, depending on the week, file for unemployment, businesses that have gone under, and so on and so on. You can see that the picture could look very grim. My concern on this channel, as you know, is with your anxieties, depressions, and just general mental health. Now, keeping in mind that the design of this broadcast and these lessons is God's answers for anxiety and depression. We first of all take a look at Jesus, who said to all of us who belong to him, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So, starting with that, And I understand that when you are alone, and some of you are alone when you watch these broadcasts, you're either still under some type of isolation, you're unemployed, other situations. I forgot to mention the rise of domestic violence, as people are just getting cabin fever from weeks and months of being shut in without a job and so forth. The first consideration for us as Christians is that Jesus said, I'll never leave you. No matter where you go, God has promised to go with you. And that's in a manner of speaking, because God is everywhere. But let me stick with the analogy. Jesus said, I will never leave you or forsake you. Now, what I wanted to point out is that we as Christians, we're very grateful for that. And that is really the stabilizing factor for us, is that God will never abandon us. People may, and people have. But God will never abandon us. Now, that is, as I just mentioned, that is our center of gravity. That is how we balance ourselves in this world. However, there's a reason that the Bible emphasizes fellowship among believers. Now, I know across the nation, and I've talked to several people here locally who are saying that their churches are only half filled. I know of one, it's in today's news as a matter of fact, one church is now bringing a lawsuit in Washington, a church in Washington, D.C., that these restrictions and so on are starting to infringe on our Bill of Rights, our First Amendment rights, and others. But going back to fellowship, there's a reason that God wrote in His Word that we are to have fellowship. And when we go over to the book of Genesis, for example, with specific reference to marriage, when God created Eve, He says, it is not good that the man should be alone. Now, we take that and we expand upon it, and we can say that it's not good for any of us to be alone. Some people by nature gravitate to being alone. They have their reasons. We all know of the proverbial hermits of mountain men who go off into the mountains, wilderness, by themselves. Not everyone in the mountains lives by themselves, but some do. And they have their reasons. And assuming they're fine with that. Most people are not. I mean, most of us are not fine with being alone all the time. Again, this is a particular problem for senior citizens, obviously people in nursing homes, and there's others, teenagers, others, who find that it's depressing, yes, but I'm going to say oppressive to the mind, to mental health, to constantly be alone. So my point is this. First of all, Jesus said He would never leave you and He would never forsake you. That is, again, our stabilizing factor in life. But the second is, I think, equally important. Otherwise, God would never have put it in the Bible, that we need fellowship one with another in order to have good mental health and keep our spiritual condition as well intact. Well, you may be in a position where your church still hasn't opened. Every state is different. You may be in a position where your church is in compliance with state regulations saying you can only have so many people in the building during a church service, and you go to a church service, say a Sunday morning, and it's really not like it used to be, which I think probably most churches, the majority of churches in the United States, that's what they're experiencing. And for the present distress that we have, I don't know how and when that's going to change. I don't know. But still, regardless of the numbers of people, as long as there's other believers there, you need to be there. Listen, when a person is depressed, and from a moderate depression to a serious depression, one of the classic behavioral patterns is to not want to go out, not want to see people. But for the most part, this will not help your depression or your anxiety. It's going to just deepen it. And with depression in particular, when you start to descend, or as the operative phrase goes, circle the drain, you start to lose hope and you start to give up. This is where suicide becomes a real threat, a real danger. People can become so desperate they lose all perspective, and then suicide seems like an option. But without going into the theological considerations of depression or the suicide, rather, let it be sufficient to say, don't ever think. Don't ever look in that direction. It's not the answer. Not the answer. It's not an exit strategy. The way out of these things is for us to work together. Now, let's say, for example, you don't have a church that you attend. At the moment, you don't have a church that you go to for whatever reason, and you're not surrounded by many Christians. Now, this broadcast becomes one of the agencies where you can have, in a very loose definition of the word, fellowship. I'm going to tell you that, there's times when I have downtime, and I find myself just curiously looking at different things, particularly on YouTube, but I do a lot of reading too. But after a while, you can only read so much. At least I can. I can only read for so many hours, and then between my eyes and my brain, I can't handle it much more. So YouTube becomes a type of option for me, and I find my spirits lifted up by going to various channels, some that I visit more regularly than others, and some I just bump into, and I find myself being picked up a bit. And be that as it may, for me, for you, for the modest group of subscribers and the modest group of people that we have right now, as far as numbers are concerned, if you don't have a church and you don't have a pastor that you can write to, you can call, or whatever, this becomes one of the ways that you can have fellowship. So 2 things I'm mentioning today. Number 1, Jesus said He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. He'll always be there. Our problem with that is not so much taking God at His word, as it is that we want somebody we can see, somebody that we can, we want another human being to be with, for again, fellowship, the friendship. And this, of course, has also, because I have correspondence with a lot of people on a daily basis, quite a number. And how often I hear people telling me of their problems with both anxiety and depression, because they can't go see their family. Sometimes it's, there's a lot of reasons, but they're all related to this present distress that we have. They can't visit their family. They haven't been able to get to church, as we just went over that, and so on. So, again, I have determined to do these broadcasts for you to take in a lot of the dynamics that go along with an ongoing condition of anxiety and depression, something you've had for a while, or for those of you who have just simply developed it seemingly out of nowhere. That's why these broadcasts exist. So, as simple as it may sound, and I say this to you all the time, some people watch this channel once, that's it, they've had it. It's not profound enough for them. Others, as I've mentioned frequently, they want something quick and easy, 2.5, 3 minutes, and they're out like a shot as well. And one of the reasons that, just as an aside, for these very short little videos that you see, that even you, and sometimes myself, I find to be helpful on certain subjects where I don't need long explanation. It has been researched that the attention span now of the average American is about that as a goldfish. It's just a few seconds. Now, I heard this once in a movie, and I thought it was just one of those Hollywood, statements. But then I was reading it by a very reputable medical doctor who said the same thing. So apparently it's true. In other words, the attention span of the average American today is not very long. But for you, as I remind you frequently, and I'll continue to remind you, your symptoms of anxiety, depression, mental health diagnoses and disorders is not going to be conquered easily. And what has compounded the problem for you and many, many others is the current situation that we're in. So I just want to say this one thing. You are not alone. You're not alone. We, I think, on this broadcast have already established that when it comes to anxiety and depression, and I use those two terms, anxiety and depression, to cover the whole gamut of mental health disorders or mental health problems and challenges. You're not alone. There's millions, tens of millions in America alone suffering from anxiety disorders, depression. Sometimes that doesn't help you because you're the one that's suffering, and that's all you want is relief, and that's understandable. But I want to just communicate to you this one thing, that you're not alone. You're not alone in your symptoms. You're not alone in your situation. And as long as we stick together, we're going to make it through this as Christians straight to eternity. And one thing before I go, I happened to notice on on this channel here, our subscribers, that we lost a couple. All right, well, after my 44th year in ministry, I'm used to seeing people come and go, and that's not so much of a concern for me, other than the people who walk away that don't get the help that they should have gotten or hear the gospel. I want to just say to you that I've heard this from other YouTube broadcasters, that all of a sudden their subscribership just drops off. So I'm just saying that because I'm not sure that it was only, by my count, it was only 2. and 2 days in a row. I'm not sure that that's because some of you unsubscribed or because something's going on with the YouTube end. And I have heard it from other YouTube broadcasters. Anyway, in any case, hang in. Let's hang in together. There's going to be days, like I said, Monday, Tuesday, I just had some little minor disturbances that prevented me from doing these broadcasts, but I'm going to hang in there with you as long as you hang in there with me. All right? So what you take away from this broadcast today is you're not alone. You're not alone. And we're going to have to, I said we're going to have to deal with this isolation business and this, I hate the word lockdown. That's the term used for inmates. We're going to have to deal with this ongoing drama together. Well, let me pray for you today. Father, I truly pray for those who are feeling isolated, lonely, depressed, shut off from the world. And I've talked to quite a few people. And I just ask you today, God, to give those who are watching that sense that they are not alone, and the real knowledge that they're not, and that they are, that we are all in this together. As long as we stick together and to encourage each other in the Lord, we're going to come out of this just fine. We're going to make it. Deliver them also from their anxieties as well as their depressions, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Also hit the notification button. As you can see, that was one example this week where twice you didn't get a notification that I uploaded a video because I didn't. So it'll help you to keep track and just stay posted on things. All right, so once again, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, I will be with you here again tomorrow on God's answers for anxiety and depression. God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.